meantime. I think the oldest longleaf that I have seen, the measurements of that were accurate, done by a scientist, of course, was something like 520 years or something like that. And I see no reason to believe that some of these trees won't reach that same age based on what I know. This forest needs to be primarily understood for its quality, and quality in every respect. Not the quality of the aesthetic quality, the ecological quality, and even the financial quality. However, incidentally, the value of the trees is the biggest, and always has been the biggest danger to this forest. This one is, I think, safe because of the ownership. And thank goodness trees don't have to be cut to pay taxes, because they'd be gone.
The Chippewas, who are fairly new tribes to the Great Lakes, new meaning hundreds of years, but the Chippewa name for Menominee was Ancient Ones. Menominee has 234,000 acres of part of their ancestral lands, which was 10.5 million acres, but there's 234,000 acres of land base, and there's 220,000 acres of forest land that they manage. So it's just about all forested, their net acreage of what they manage. So, 95% of the land base is forested and managed. In our forest management plan, it also tells how many acres we're going to try to achieve in 150 years of various forest cover types. And with those applications of different cutting regimes, we apply different silvicultural tests, different cutting regimes. One of those that we use a lot of on Menominee, because we have a lot of northern hardwood, is single tree selection, where we take out the worst tree and leave the best. And I say that real strong because other people say they use single tree selection and they really take out the biggest and the best and leave the worst. In our single tree selection, it's just the reverse. We take out the worst and leave the best. And we do that every 15 years, and we have a minimum number of trees that we have to leave per acre. This is kind of an anomaly down in this part of the forest to our regular type of management. The trees, most of the trees that have the bluish green paint on it are oak trees, and we want to maintain a small amount of oak trees in this area. Most of the area will be sugar maple and white pine, all our surrounding acres. But if we're going to maintain oak down here, we need some type of disturbance. And we need to open it up, the canopy way up above, so you get sunlight down on the ground and you disturb the ground in order for the oak acorns to germinate and to be free to grow. Again, what we're doing in forestry, we're trying to grow the maximum quality in quantity in as much native species as we can. Those attributes or those goals give a lot of other indirect benefits. Most people would agree a tall, clear tree has good lumber value, good quality, but also those values are values that people attribute to spiritual. You have a tall, clear stand of trees, kind of reaching to the heavens, white pine, that gives you the spiritual valuation. In order to get trees like that, you normally have to, in the lake states, have longer rotations. The tree has to stay on the ground longer, maybe 180 years. But what's really key, and I think what may be different about Menominee than a lot of other places, is we apply our prescriptions to the forest. From there, we make models and estimate how much from the application of those prescriptions are going to come out of those prescriptions, and then we give those to our salespeople in our mill. And from that, our salespeople and our mill people have to cut and try to sell that. So, the old cliche, you fit the mill to the resource. you don't fit the resource to the mill. Is kind of one of the key things that has enabled us to survive. That's why we have big trees yet, and that's why we have a lot of diversity yet.
Well, it was, I guess what you call love at first sight. I just loved the area, I loved the tranquility. The fellow I bought it off of had quite a few trees set up and ready to roll. Bob was my forester. He set up my forestry plan and works my farm assessment also. We raised a bunch of white pines, and then most of the native trees are what they call bull pine. I mean, that's what I call them, the bull pines, and I have a nice stand of white cedar, a real nice stand of white cedar that I used a lot of at the house. Porch columns come from out back. They're a white cedar. And the columns inside the house are red cedar. They're the upland cedars. Some of the logs across the kitchen there come from out back. They're white cedars. Some of my rafters upstairs in pine, they come out from out back. So I kind of utilize whatever I could out back to dress up and make up things. I think it's got more character than the new stuff. I like the wood. Just working and playing in the forest is my biggest thing. It's just an enjoyable, it's a clean, what nature gives you. I'm just trying to utilize the land, and it's just not for raising trees and just leaving them go. They have to be maintained, and I think that's the same way with the forest. I mean, if they don't burn it off and they don't maintain it to a degree, it's just going to be a tinderbox.
We average in South Carolina about 3,000 to 5,000 wildfires each year. Of that total, about 40% of them, a little 40 to 45% of those fires are started by debris burns that get away from people.
If the forest is just left like that, wildfires can go through there. They can't be stopped because there's no natural breaks to slow down a forest fire.
But when European settlers came and we started to develop and establish settlements, we started to fragment the landscape with our developments. And so what happens when you have fire and houses? You can't let the fire run through the way it used to. So the fire that would come through and kill some of the trees that were growing in, we had to suppress those.
We've seen in past years and decades the terrible wildfires that destroy a lot of our forests. And if people could understand the value of prescribed burning, the Native Americans used to do it when they were living here without European influence. And I think if we look to the wisdom of the way that they were managing the forest lands, then we would have less incidents of these terrible wildfires.
One aspect of management is the use of fire. Many landowners are using fire in a prescribed and controlled fashion, similar to how the Native Americans had done this for thousands of years.
And I'd like to call that prescribed fire or managed wildland fire. And fire is a great tool. We can make so much headway with fire. We can reduce competition, we can eliminate unnecessary plants, things that we call weeds. We can reduce the amount of leaf and other litter on the ground, and we can reduce slash. So fire is a great tool, and I wish we used it more often.
Controlled burning is a very important part, especially in the New Jersey pine barrens forests. They've adapted and evolved with burning, both man-caused and lightning-caused through their history, and evolved with that.
2007, we had a large wildfire in the Warren Grove area. When I say large, it was about 15,000 acres. It affected a lot of the residents of Barnegat and Stafford Township. A lot of highways were closed, there were some homes lost. And that area right there was extremely hazardous fuel loading. Okay, it hadn't seen fire since 1971, and it was basically a tinderbox just waiting for that day.
small wildfires catch really quickly, and they just go so fast, so fast. But we were lucky.
What the New Jersey Forest Fire Service has done, in about the past 50 years, we've really stepped up our program of prescribed burning. What we do prescribed burning for is hazard reduction here in New Jersey. And we've reduced the hazard by burning off the underbrush and the dead fine fuels that exist on the forest floor. This gives an opportunity to reduce the ladder fuels that in the event of a large fire would carry the fire into the crowns. And it also, it's healthier for the forest and cleans off the dead stuff and allows for the new stuff to grow up. We start to plan about a year in advance as to where we'd like to put in our prescribed burning projects. We basically rotate. We maintain prescribed burn blocks, and we try to touch on each one of them between 5 to 7 years. We look at areas, natural barriers and such, good gravel roads and places like that. And we also look at fire history, where large fires have passed before, because history does repeat itself. And we look at where we could stop a large fire. So like for instance here today, we're actually burning a narrow strip that's probably only about 250 feet wide, but it's several miles long. So basically that strip is kind of like our, where in the event of a large fire, we would attempt to do a backfiring operation and hold the large fire here at this road.
Fire evolved to be a very bad tool, as you know, the history of fire. And Herbert Stoddard, the man that was my mentor and that I worked with and lived on his place, Julie and I, we worked with him and up until he died, from the time I went to work for him, which was, I think we were with him 22 years, I believe. And Stoddard was the premier voice for advocating the use of fire in forest management and wildlife management. And Thomasville played a big part in that historically.
This forest is kept open by the use of frequent fire every 1 to 2 years. Fire is an age-old process that plays a natural role, as natural as sunshine, rain, and wind, and just as important to all the plant and animal species that depend on it for their very survival. We say that prescribed fire is a safe way to apply a natural process, ensure ecosystem health, and reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires.
If you take the fuel out from under the trees in a controlled conditions, then you're reducing the risk of having a damaging wildfire later on. At the same time that you're reducing that wildfire risk, you're also getting some wildlife benefits, you're improving the appearance of the forest, and also helping make it easier to travel in and around the trees. This area that we're standing in was actually burned in January of this year. And you can see by looking at the vegetation that by this summer things have already come back and greening up. The wildlife like this nice green succulent vegetation to feed on, and also it's helping to reduce the wildfire risk in this particular area.
We have fires, what we call prescribed fires, that we intentionally set to regulate and control vegetation. Working for a Native American organization, fire has been a part of their culture for thousands of years. That was one of the main tools they used to regulate and manage different forest cover types. The acreage that we have today, a lot of what we call northern hardwoods, sugar maple, basswood, yellow birch, hemlock, that combination of species, was in small acreage supply, if you want to call it that, at the Treaty of 1854, because the tribe had been burning over routinely much of their acreage, their ancestral acreage, for thousands of years, and it brought up these species like pine, like hemlock, and there was a lot of those. The only way you can get those species back is through the use of fire and disturbance.
There's many different types of thinnings that can be done on the forest, and thinning is important in terms of enhancing structure as well as controlling forest density. And particularly where I work in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, thinning is important because there's been a history of fire suppression as people start to live in this forest, and fire suppression tends to beget a higher density of pine forests, and the higher density pine forests are harder to burn around houses, so we use thinning in order to enhance these forests for structure and for safety. Research is, of course, very important to any good decision making in the future is very important in forestry. So we use a lot of computer modeling. Some of the models that were developed through the U.S. Forest Service dealing with forest fire fuels. And we took a real stand of trees in Belle Plaine State Forest and inventoried them. I'm able to use the model, the growth end of the model, to predict what that forest would look like in 2058 with no management. If we take no action, you can see some yellow crowns in there from where some trees have been killed off by competition. You can see a lot of down material on the ground. And if that wildfire comes on a given day in 2058, that 80-degree day with 20-mile-an-hour winds, you can see the little red flames in the crown there, and basically the forest gets wiped out. And this is a very difficult condition to control if it were close to homes. And then where we burn only, you can see the forest is a little less dense because just putting prescribed burning into this forest thins it out to some extent. And then when that wildfire comes through, in this case, it would stay on the ground instead of getting up into the treetops. So we have most of the trees look like they're probably going to live, and a fire like this would be much easier to control. Another scenario that we did run is thinning and burning. With this scenario, you can see the forest is more open, but really about the same density, but the trees are almost double the size of just burning in this example. And again, if we have a wildfire in the forest, the wildfire will stay on the ground.